far. I'm Kevin Cabral from our yield management practice, and I have with me as well Phusitkanchana and Mr. Harvin Gupta, who are joining us out of our London office. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick this off, and then with a little bit of an audience straw poll. Do you all want to slide over? See where you are all with header bidding business best practices these days. So we'll start with the usual. Who's doing header bidding today? Show of hands. I would guessing 25%, which is really interesting compared to, of course, our experience in the States where the number's a bit higher. Of those who are doing header bidding, do you know what tech provides your wrapper and why they were selected? Show of hands. Fewer, like total of 5% of the audience, 20% of those using header bidding would be my guess here. So it's interesting because so much of our conference has been about tech and wrappers, but yet there's still a bit of opacity about what business consideration should be made in selecting a wrapper. Finally, this can go for anyone using header bidding, not header bidding, but who has an in-house programmatic sales team that focuses specifically on that? Okay, we're closer to 50% of the room here. And then another question that's related is who relies, whether you have an in-house sales team or not, who relies on their SSP partner to sell for them? For example, to arrange PMPs and to do other engagement with buyers. It's actually very few here. So that's also a very interesting point where Europe has built up excellent sales motions around programmatic at the publisher level and perhaps not been so dependent upon the SSP to do that work. Final point is, do you have a yield management and analytics function that supports your sales team in your publisher? Okay. That's probably about 15 to 25% of the room. So maybe about a third of the publishers who have a sales team have a yield and analytics team supporting it, it seems. So let me begin with a little background for you that I presented originally with Michael Richardson to our most attended webinar in history so far at AppNexus, which was specifically focused on header bidding best practices. I want to just give you the key takeaway from that, and then we'll start handing it over to get into more depth on different aspects of header bidding. So the first key secret to success is transparency. If you think of header bidding as a governance mechanic, as governance of things that happen on your page, governance of the way that bids are processed when they come back from demand, and then governance of how things are passed cleanly into the ad server, you can start to imagine that probably one of the key principles is to make sure that you have transparent and dependable rules, that you have a fair and just system that everybody understands. So that is what drives transparency as the first consideration. The next would be equality, and specifically equality of demand in the auction end to end, and that's inclusive of not just the question of whether or not the wrapper is processing all bids with equal priority and passing them to the ad server and such, but you actually have to think about the way that each individual marketplace or header bidder is set up in the platform, considering aspects like flooring, ad quality, latency, and all these different configurations that if you were to create a blocker in one marketplace, for example, in one marketplace, you're blocking off a subset of buyers or brands, but you're not blocking them through another place, all of a sudden that creates far more friction in the header bidding world than it used to do in the waterfall world, because the buyer in the header bidding world is essentially assuming that they should have equal access to the supply through your header as they have on AdX, and in theory, they should have equal access to supply through AppNexus as Rubicon, et cetera. So that's what equality is about. And then the final point is efficiency. We've spoken a lot to taxes as a general theme. So you should think about efficiency at all different levels. How efficient is the wrapper on your page? How efficient is it to swap demand in and out? And finally, how efficient is the end transaction for the buyer? So with that, those three ingredients should combine to really turn demand to dollars, or since I'm just another American up on stage and we really need to adapt this for Europe, I would definitely say demand to pounds, to euros, to zloty, to whatever your favorite European currency is. And with that in mind, I think that's the theme here, is what started very much in the United States as a bit of an export is something that I'm and all of us are looking to really hand over and grow locally. So without further ado, I want to introduce Harvin Gupta to take it from here.
Thank you, Kevin. Hey everyone, so my name's Harvin Gupta, and I work as a solutions engineer. Every day I talk to publishers about header bidding, and one of the key questions that I always get asked is, how do I choose which wrapper to work with? Because, well, there's so many wrappers out there, there's so many different things that you can choose from. How do you decide what's most important? So up here I've got what I think are the three most important things. And actually I think the first one, transparency and agnostic demand, is actually the most important thing. So let's think about what's the holy grail of header bidding. Why are we doing this? Well, the holy grail is for each and every impression, you want to be able to monetize at the highest CPM possible. Now the wrapper should facilitate that. And if the wrapper has any inbuilt bias, or if the wrapper is maybe favoritizing one set of demand over another, then you're moving away from the holy grail. So that's something that you really need to bake into your decision-making process. And actually, saying that you've got no bias is not enough. You need to be able to validate that, so you need really robust analytics to make sure that each and every impression is being monetized at the highest possible rate. So the next thing I want to talk about is how easy it is to onboard demand. So let's have a think about how the waterfall used to work. When we used to have a waterfall, it was really easy to test new demand sources. You could just chuck in a tag at the top of your waterfall, see how it performs for a week or two. If it's revenue negative, chuck it out, and if it's revenue positive, leave it there. So header bidding's different because we don't have a waterfall anymore, but we still want the ability to test different demand sources at ease without too much friction. So I think this is another thing that you really need to bake into your decision-making process. How quickly and easily can you switch out demand sources, and how easily can you report against how effective that decision was? Finally, let's think about innovation. So we all know that the publishers that are successful in this space are the ones that are continually innovating. And the wrapper should be able to support that innovation. It should help you with that innovation. It shouldn't be a blocker. So some of the key things that I'm thinking about in this space are, can the wrapper support friendly iframes or even safe frame? Because this will allow you as publishers to do some really interesting things with creatives. Will the wrapper support a single request? So can it take all of the ads on the page, bundle them together, and send that as one request? Because that's going to start to chip away at latency. And finally, what about formats? What about video? What about AMP? What about mobile? What about native? Does the wrapper support all of these formats? And can you be sure that as you evolve and as you innovate, the wrapper is going to be able to support that? Okay, so the next thing that I get asked, so I'm actually quite lucky. I get to work with some really premium publishers. And in my experience, a lot of these publishers they're quite risk averse. They want to test the waters slowly. So one of the things that I get asked quite a lot is, look, we're really interested in header bidding. We really like the idea of the revenue uplift and the efficiency, but we're worried about latency. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait until server to server is more mature and then adopt that. To these publishers, I've got a couple of things that I want to say. Firstly, let's think about the problem that server-to-server solves. It's a scale problem. If you're a publisher and you want to put 10 different adapters in your head, that's not going to work. That means your browser's going to start to slow down. So you want to move those into the server. But if you're a cautious publisher who's just testing the waters, you're probably only going to work with 1 or 2 adapters, which is absolutely fine to put into your head. So really think about the problems that solved. Also, let's look at latency. The waterfall in itself causes immense latency. Every time you make a call and then there's a response, that's introducing latency. So by flattening that waterfall, actually you're saving quite a lot there. Also, I wanted to say a few words on transparency. One of the real reasons why publishers love header bidding is it really opens up that black box. It allows you to see exactly what's going on. It allows you to have bid landscape level analytics. So this has been a real step forward. I think this has been one of the biggest steps forward in the industry that we've seen in a really long time. But server to server could be a step backwards. Because as soon as you move things into the server, it's possible that you're going to lose that control. You're going to lose all of the insights that you have. So as an industry, I would urge everyone that when we do start thinking about moving to server, we don't let go of the transparency that we've gained, that we've achieved through header bidding. So the last thing I want to talk about is a hybrid solution. And this is what I would really push publishers to think about. So a hybrid solution basically means putting some of the partners, some of your most important partners, in your head, and then putting the long tail in the server. But what's crucial here is you want the ability to chop and change without too much friction. What would happen if I removed this partner out of my head and put it into the server? What impact does that have on latency? What impact does that have on my revenue? Was that a good decision to make? I need the analytics to support that. So if you're thinking about server to server, at the same time you need to be thinking about the analytics. How are you going to structure the data to prove that the decisions that you've taken are the correct ones for your business? OK, cool, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Fon now.
Thank you. I'm Fon. I'm working the account management team on the seller side. And very relevant to what I do on a daily basis is to talk about how do we restructure the sales now that we live in a world where demand has never been more fragmented. Header bidding is now sending through so much demand from multiple channels. Sales has to adapt to that as well. So in a way, looking at it as like a massive one giant SSP that you have to deal with. To do that, first thing first would be short-term solution. You can't expect demand to flow in through your favorite path. The redirection part has to come in later. First thing you have to make sure is that all your buyers get equal amount of access to your inventory. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the right one now. So I will give you an example. Let's say you have a group of inventory that you set the floor rules very relevant to the size of the billboard. And you set that particular rule onto one SSP. Let's say AppNexus. And you did not set the same rule for other demand partners that you have, that you work with. So what will happen as an end result is that you will be missing some of the demand coming through AppNexus, and therefore bid density goes down. You're not optimizing what header bidding has to offer. So short term, you have to find demand where they are, fish where the fish are. I think that's an English way of saying it. We say it differently in Thailand. And with that, first thing you think about would be make sure all your buyers have the same access to your inventory, and make sure that you don't set any extra layer of friction onto particular partners that you work with. That include things that I have seen so far would be ad quality rules, format, transaction types, data targeting. Now, this is the first stage. Once you have done this standardization stage, you move on to the next one, which is starting thinking about baking platform differentiation into your product line. So I can give you another example. Let's say there is a particular billboard inventory that you would like to put on another layer of ad quality control is extra precious. And maybe you can find a handful of demand partners that you can have that extra control for yourself. To do that, it's very important to tell the buyers where you're going to be selling these inventory from. And also make sure that this clear communication is done before you start executing. What I've seen so far in the differentiation phase in terms of platform is same thing would be deal setting, formatting, and ad quality rules. Same thing apart to the standardization part. But now you find your favorite partner to work on for different keys. And I would like to talk a bit more about private marketplace. That's why it's in a separate section, even though it's under the same theme of finding differentiation across your partners. So with private marketplace, it's more of an intimate relationship sellers and buyers have. And some of you might have favorite ones to work with, and buyers might have a different one to work with. This is when I have to emphasize clear communication is very essential. And to find a right platform for you to efficiently create these deals is like finding the right housing. I think that's probably an appropriate metaphor. Finding a house with the buyers. So eventually, or you might already have identified your favorite platform to manage PMPs, communicate to the buyers as well, and bear in mind with some room of flexibility that buyers might also have developed their own algorithm, their own ways of operating within the PMP areas. And in that way, you can work synchronously. What I've seen also, having worked with a couple publishers, is that when they communicate, they usually go through processes of how things are set up. So that might take some time as well. So please do bear that in mind. And now we have covered 2 stages of sales optimization. Standardization. Once you got that sorted, you move on to differentiation. These sales strategy shifts required correct data points. And in header bidding world, you have much more volume of data to understand per one auction. You need really good, powerful analytic tools to help you with that, to make this shift as least painful as possible. So now thinking about how can I pick the right tools for myself, making the right decision is all about knowing your options. And the more options you have, the better. Now, I'm going to refer back to Harvin's point a bit about working with open source partners like Preview.js. If you're thinking about building your own in-house analytic tools, open source is the most flexible one for you to innovate at your own pace, not restricted to proprietary technology partners that others out there. And that applies also to third-party data vendor that focuses on building analytic solutions. They prefer, like, for example, Atomic, Rockset, Google Analytics. They prefer working with open source platform because it gives them the flexibility to innovate as well. My every more sophisticated clients that I've worked with, they manage this part really well. They have built their own analytic tools that allow them to identify the right prices and deduplicate that across their demand partners, and eventually manage to allocate the right attention to the right relationship. And so these are the points I would like to make about the sales optimization in the header bidding world. On the next section would be about yield management, and Kevin will be covering that. It will be.
We will have some time for Q&A in just a couple minutes, if you can hold that. And conversation afterwards, too. It'd be great. So I'm back just to wrap yield management. And the challenge is that historically yield management in the waterfall world was a bit of a challenge to determine which SSP channel would pay the highest price for inventory since all the bids were not unified. Therefore, yield managers typically worked within each SSP's platform, pulling levers, using tools, etc., to maximize yield, as well as running tests. What happens if you flip one SSP up or down the waterfall? But now that we've collapsed the waterfall, we're in a new world where actually the whole of yield management needs to evolve. And I would suggest that it's probably going to evolve to look a lot more like yield management in the direct sold channel. Why is that? The first point is pass-through of bids. I see more and more of the demand partners in header bidding transparently passing through their best bid without any further price reduction. If you look at what Facebook's doing, if you look at what, in effect, most exchanges are doing, is passing through the bid that they get from demand into the header. The rationale behind that is somewhat logical. If you consider that each SSP now is no longer running the final auction. The final auction is happening in the ad server, and the final auction is happening against demand that is also reflecting that demand's true willingness to pay. So we have this trend towards pass-through bidding, which has a second-order effect of pushing up CPMs, such that programmatic CPMs are now easily reaching or surpassing direct in more and more cases. So where historically in the waterfall world, both the quality of inventory and the high degree of bid price reduction tended to make programmatic the cheap way to buy, now it looks more and more like direct, which is being reflected in the CPMs that buyers are paying and that sellers are realizing, which leads to two interesting conclusions or suggestions as yield departments develop their strategy for this year. The first one is that higher CPMs in programmatic really necessitate the need to take a fresh look at direct pricing and policies and rates. So many publishers that I speak with are actively looking at where they can go into the kind of lower priced reservations that they might have taken previously from an agency, business they were doing direct with networks, any kind of sweeper campaigns, really anything that's out there that could be in the legacy ad server holding back the win rate of high-value programmatic CPMs. They're looking at either not selling that business at all, or increasing rate on that business, or decreasing the priority, inclusive of shifting that business to be completely bidded through some platform where they'll simply bid on their own inventory. So that trend is one to look out for. Then the final point would be that ultimately this is leading yield teams on programmatic and direct to talk to each other more. The programmatic yield team used to be the masters of the SSP land, and the direct team knew the ad server. And now with header bidding, they really are starting to talk to each other, and that's leading to an interesting learning that perhaps legacy ad servers are starting to hold back the win rates of programmatic. You may be familiar with various workaround solutions that yield teams are implementing, for example, to send high-value bids from programmatic up into higher tiers of the ad server than header bidding might usually compete at. And there's other tactics that are being used. Ultimately, there's a process of experimentation that every publisher should be going through right now to just think simply, how do you make more inventory winnable in programmatic? And second, how do you question the assumption that the allocation in legacy ad servers actually maximizes your revenue? So the upshot is yield will start to migrate out of the SSP platforms towards the header and the ad server. And in turn, that should lead to a greater convergence between the type of rates and tactics that you see in programmatic and those that you're very familiar with from the direct sold business. So just to do a quick wrap up before we head over to Q&A, here are some reminders. Transparency, equality, and efficiency are the key ingredients to lead to more demand directly translating to dollars for you, or pounds. Insist and verify transparency to maximize revenue. Server to server's here, but it's still a work in progress, and we definitely suggest that the hybrid architecture is the best architecture that gives you the option to integrate some partners in the server, some in the client, and move them around with minimum of friction. Then the last 2 points really are about, even if I don't have the answers yet, you may have the answers if you simply think about all the legacy sales processes and legacy yield processes that your company created around legacy ad server, legacy SSP, and ask the right questions. How should this change in the marketplace, in the integration, in the quality of the inventory, in the bidding strategies being used by buyers, impact sales and impact yield? I think that will lead to a next phase of growth for many publishers, where at first it'll be about getting header bidding up and running, plugging in integrations, figuring out the wrapper layer, but then at a certain level of maturity, you need to optimize business growth, and sales management and yield management are going to be critical to that. There's one last thing, which is as you leave for a break, we will be having a header bidding checklist that we'll be distributing, which came directly out of the webinar that Michael Richardson and I did. You could also contact your AppNexus account manager to get some links to this webinar, but I think taking a look at this checklist will also help shed light on some of the key strategic and optimization opportunities around header bidding. And if you don't mind, I'll at least take this one gentleman's question, since I did promise it.
Go
Come
for
on
it,
back,
just for once.
Harvin, and fun.
Yeah, so this is going to be a critical question, and it's probably going to answer why in the US you have a higher adoption of header bidding than in Europe. So could you go back to the slide of Fawn? Then, yeah, because what happens is that if we're going to adopt header bidding in Europe, I need to sign a lot of SSP contracts. I need to set the pricing in every SSP. Then I need to talk to every agency and tell them which DSP they're using, because sometimes they don't know. And then I need to set up dashboards, make APIs, have very expensive people, which are hard to find, to manage it. So in the US, you have a large volume of people. It's a big island of 350 million people. And in Europe, we have a lot of different states, which are hard to talk to, and where you need to have people, maybe even talk multiple languages. So that's where the cost increase comes from. And that's why, even though it brings me in more money, it will also incur more costs, and especially more HR costs. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how many impressions per month a publisher should have, or how many revenue per month a publisher should have, where you think it will balance out the investment in setting up header bidding versus of actually the yield, as yield managers, yes, the yield you will get from header bidding versus the cost incurred by getting all these people that are not available in the market?
Yep, good question.
Yes?
Well, you answered a decent amount of your question on the pricing. One thing to consider is that Europe, as I've understood it, is far more relationship oriented. With that also frequently comes a higher percentage of direct sell-through rate. So although there may be more cost to implementing header bidding in Europe, there could also be more benefit if direct sell-through and limited competition between platforms was inhibiting programmatic. It's just sort of one thing to consider. Beyond that, the next consideration a big reason that header bidding took off in the United States was that there's a fair amount of open exchange RTB buying. There's so many publishers to buy that buyers just operate on whitelists based on domains. So the more that you have a marketplace in your local region where buyers are pretty comfortable buying domains, using tools to verify the source, the more likely that plugging in header bidding immediately picks up a lot of demand, right?
Apologies for stopping this. I think this is
I'll
a
run
great
my models
conversation to have
afterwards.
over a cocktail or a glass of wine at 3 p.m.
But give a range, right? Say, do you need to do 1 million revenues, 10 million revenues, 50 million revenues?
So I've seen small publishers benefit, like very small publishers benefit. I've seen small, nimble ad networks benefit, and then I've seen large enterprise publishers benefit. So I don't think that number exists. I want to have let's talk afterwards because I've got some talking points I'd like to discuss with you.